Nora's voice trembled on the recording. "I've done everything. Don't pin this on me." Ethan smirked, his eyes cold. She had no idea the trap was already set. "This isn't over," he whispered. "Not until you lose everything." Ethan Langley's life appeared flawless. He was a respected cybersecurity expert, working remotely in a sleek home office that reflected his precise nature. His wife, Nora, was the perfect picture of grace, managing her career as an event planner while maintaining their immaculate suburban home. Together, they seemed like the quintessential couple, admired by neighbors and envied by friends. Their evenings were routine but comfortable. They dined together, shared wine by the fireplace, and often reminisced about their early days. Ethan adored Nora's sharp wit and radiant smile, and she seemed equally committed to him. He often wondered what he had done to deserve such a fulfilling partnership. But perfection is a fragile illusion. One evening, while Nora was out for a late meeting, Ethan's routine was disrupted. He had planned to work on a high-profile cybersecurity case but decided to clean up their shared laptop first. He noticed an encrypted folder on the device, a curious anomaly for someone like Nora, who often forgot her own passwords. At first, Ethan dismissed it as an old work file. Yet his instincts, honed through years of unraveling digital mysteries, nudged him to investigate. Cracking the encryption was child's play for someone of his skill. What he uncovered made his breath catch in his throat. Dozens of documents, emails, and photographs revealed Nora's secret correspondence with someone named Peregrine. The conversations were cryptic, yet laced with an ominous undertone. References to the plan, target acquisition, and cryptic phrases like, "The family debt is almost repaid," sent chills through Ethan. Among the files was a photo of his sister, Lily, smiling at a birthday party Ethan had hosted just months ago. His heart pounded as he realized the betrayal wasn't just against him. It was something far deeper. Ethan's perfect life began to crumble that night, but his resolve hardened. If Nora had hidden this, what else was she capable of? The answer would take him down a dark and harrowing path. Ethan's mind was in chaos, but his instincts drove him forward. He stayed up all night combing through the encrypted files, reconstructing a narrative from the fragmented emails and hidden folders. It became clear that Nora had been meticulously coordinating with Peregrine for years. What at first seemed like a financial scam began to morph into something far more sinister. Photographs of his sister Lily were laced throughout the correspondence. Ethan's heart sank as he uncovered mentions of monitoring and staying close to the mark. In one email, Peregrine outlined a chilling objective: ensure the Langley girl never learns the truth. Keep Ethan distracted. The revelation hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was a carefully orchestrated manipulation targeting his family. His sister had always been the light of his life, and the thought of her being part of some scheme sent rage coursing through his veins. Ethan knew he needed proof. He took steps to back up every file, storing copies on encrypted drives and securing them in hidden locations. He began to quietly observe Nora, noting her patterns and logging every move she made. As he delved deeper, he realized this wasn't the work of just two people. There were layers, others involved, but their roles remained unclear. Still, one thing was certain. This was a game, and Nora had played him for a fool. But Ethan wasn't about to let her win. Not this time. Ethan's determination hardened into resolve. He couldn't confront Nora directly, not yet. She was too smart, too practiced in deception. Instead, he decided to follow the threads outward, beginning with Peregrine. He knew the importance of patience. Using his expertise in cybersecurity, Ethan dissected the metadata in the emails and found fragments of a digital trail. It led him to an anonymous messaging board buried deep in the dark web, where Peregrine communicated with other shadowy figures. What he found chilled him. The board wasn't just for petty schemes or scams. It was a hub for long-term manipulation tactics, targeting families, businesses, and individuals for profit, blackmail, or even revenge. Each operation had a code name, and the one involving his sister was called Iron Vine. Reading through their exchanges, Ethan pieced together a horrifying picture. Nora's betrayal was part of a larger operation to exploit Lily. The documents hinted at an inheritance tied to his late parents, a significant sum that Ethan had never known about, hidden in complex legal trusts. It seemed Lily's lack of awareness about the money was key to the plot. Ethan's mind raced. Why hadn't Nora just told him? Why go through such elaborate deceit? The answer, he realized, lay in control. She hadn't wanted to just access the money. She wanted to own the narrative to ensure no one could stop her. But why? What had driven her to this level of treachery? Ethan dug deeper into the network, uncovering more names and aliases connected to Iron Vine. He noted them down, feeling the pieces of the puzzle snapping into place. He realized he wasn't just dealing with Nora. This was a conspiracy. And to destroy it, he'd have to be as ruthless as they were. For now, Ethan kept his discoveries secret, wearing the mask of a clueless husband. He planned his next move, knowing the game had only just begun. Ethan decided it was time to test the waters. He needed to confirm how deeply Nora was entangled and whether she was acting on her own or under direct orders from Peregrine. He began by planting a subtle digital trap on the laptop, a piece of code designed to monitor her keystrokes and send alerts if she accessed any of the encrypted files again. For days, there was nothing. Nora went about her life as if nothing was amiss, leaving Ethan in a state of near-constant tension. It wasn't until one Friday evening, when she excused herself after dinner to check emails, that the first alert pinged. Ethan stayed calm, sipping his coffee while watching the code in real time. Nora opened a hidden browser, typing in a password Ethan wouldn't have been able to guess. Moments later, she accessed a private chat room where Peregrine's alias was active. Her messages were curt and direct. Everything is on track. He suspects nothing. Timeline, Peregrine responded. 2 weeks. Once the documents are signed, I'll secure the funds. Good. No mistakes. He's smart. Smarter than most. Ethan's stomach churned. Documents? Funds? They were moving faster than he anticipated. His thoughts immediately went to Lily. She had no idea she was in danger, let alone being used. Ethan decided it was time to strike back. Just enough to throw Nora and her accomplices off balance. Using a burner phone, he sent a cryptic text to Nora from an anonymous number. I know what you're planning. Stop now, or everything comes crashing down. He watched her reaction from the hallway. Nora froze, her face draining of color. She quickly deleted the message, glancing nervously toward the door. Ethan knew he had rattled her, but it was only the beginning. Later that night, as Nora lay silently beside him in bed, Ethan stared at the ceiling. He knew the time for subtlety was nearing its end. To protect Lily and unravel the network, he'd have to upend everything, and that meant taking risks he hadn't dared consider before. Ethan spent the weekend observing Nora closely, careful to maintain his facade. But now he noticed the subtle shifts in her demeanor. Her nervous glances at her phone, the distracted way she responded to his questions, the way she seemed to recoil when he came too close. The anonymous message had done its job. To further stoke her paranoia, Ethan created a fake online profile under the guise of an investigative journalist. He began posting vague, ominous articles on a local news forum about corruption, fraud, and financial conspiracies. One article hinted at an ongoing investigation involving stolen inheritance funds and manipulation within family trusts. The next morning, Ethan saw the trap spring into action. Nora had been scrolling on her phone during breakfast when she abruptly set it down, her expression unreadable. Later, she slipped into her office and locked the door, something she rarely did. Ethan planted himself in the adjacent room, his ear pressed to the thin wall. Her voice was tense as she whispered into her phone. We've got a problem. Someone's sniffing around. Yes, I'm sure. The timing isn't a coincidence. The call confirmed what Ethan already suspected. Nora wasn't working alone. He needed to identify her contacts and expose the full web of deceit. But first, he had to ensure Lily's safety. That evening, Ethan called his sister. He framed it as a casual check-in but subtly probed for any unusual occurrences in her life. Lily, as warm and trusting as ever, laughed off his concerns. "Ethan, you're overthinking things. Life is boring as usual, I promise." Her words only deepened his resolve. She was blind to the danger around her. Later that night, as Nora slept, Ethan accessed her email again, searching for anything connected to these documents she had mentioned to Peregrine. He found it buried under layers of disguised folders. A digital draft of a forged will, transferring Lily's inheritance to a shell account. Ethan stared at the screen, his fury simmering. They weren't just manipulating Lily, they were planning to erase her future entirely. His next move would have to be bold. He needed to send a message that he wasn't just aware of their plans, he was actively dismantling them. And he knew exactly how to start. Ethan's plan required precision. His first step was to sabotage the financial aspect of the operation. If Nora and her accomplices intended to siphon Lily's inheritance, he needed to make their efforts futile before they could execute the final steps. Using his cybersecurity expertise, Ethan hacked into the shell account linked to the forged will. It didn't take long to uncover the account's transactions. Significant sums of money funneled in and out, tied to various aliases. Ethan quietly rerouted the remaining balance into a series of offshore accounts he controlled, leaving nothing but breadcrumbs that looped back to Peregrine. To cover his tracks, Ethan manipulated the logs to make it appear as though Peregrine had been embezzling from his own team. He left a single damning transaction labeled, "Personal payout, no disclosure," knowing it would sow distrust among their ranks. The following day, he set the second phase in motion. Ethan fabricated a series of emails that appeared to be internal communications between Peregrine and another accomplice. The messages implied that Nora had been withholding critical information from the rest of the group and hinted at a side deal she was pursuing without their knowledge. He encrypted the fake emails and planted them in Nora's secure folder, ensuring they'd be discovered during her next interaction with Peregrine. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. By evening, Ethan noticed Nora pacing anxiously in the backyard, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. Her voice was clipped and defensive as she hissed into the receiver, "Why would I do that? I've been nothing but loyal to this plan. Don't you dare pin this on me." Ethan watched from the kitchen window, his expression cold. The seeds of mistrust were taking root. That night, he received an encrypted message on his burner phone. Another fake account he had set up as a concerned third party within Peregrine's network. The message read, "Nora's exposed us. Pull back before she ruins everything." Ethan smiled grimly. The cracks in their operation were widening. But as satisfying as it was to dismantle their scheme piece by piece, Ethan knew he wasn't just playing for vengeance. He needed to ensure Lily's safety and uncover the full extent of their plot before he made his final move. For now, though, watching Nora squirm was a small victory he relished. Nora's panic was palpable the following morning. Ethan watched as she scrambled to make calls and sent frantic messages, all while pretending nothing was wrong. Her facade was cracking, and Ethan took pleasure in her discomfort. By mid-afternoon, she left the house abruptly, claiming she had an urgent errand. Ethan already knew where she was headed. He had traced her communications the previous night and discovered that she had arranged an emergency meeting with one of Peregrine's subordinates at a secluded cafe on the outskirts of town. Ethan followed at a safe distance, keeping his car inconspicuous. He parked a block away and approached the cafe on foot, slipping into a seat by the window where he had a clear view of Nora and her contact. The man, sharp-featured and impatient, gestured emphatically as they argued. Ethan activated a small recording device hidden in his jacket, tuning into the conversation through a parabolic microphone he had purchased for this very purpose. "And now Peregrine thinks I'm a liability," Nora hissed. "Do you have any idea what that means for me?" The man leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "What it means is that you'd better fix this. If Peregrine decides you're a problem, you're done." Nora's face twisted with frustration. "I didn't do anything. Someone is sabotaging us. You need to convince him it isn't me." Ethan's stomach tightened. He had hoped to gather more concrete details about the operation, but it was clear they were being cautious. Still, the fear in Nora's voice confirmed one thing: she was no longer in control. As they continued their heated exchange, Ethan noticed a man in a leather jacket sitting alone at a nearby table, his gaze fixed on Nora and her companion. He wasn't part of the cafe staff or a casual customer. His demeanor was too deliberate. Ethan realized he might be one of Peregrine's enforcers, sent to monitor the situation. The stakes were escalating faster than Ethan had anticipated. Later that evening, when Nora returned home, Ethan greeted her with forced cheerfulness. She mumbled something about being tired and retreated to her room. Ethan could see the strain etched on her face, the weight of suspicion and fear bearing down on her. He knew he couldn't let this drag out much longer. The network was beginning to unravel, and Nora was on the brink of either imploding or taking drastic action to save herself. Ethan needed to stay ahead of her, but more importantly, he needed to protect Lily from whatever fallout was coming. That night, he drafted the next stage of his plan, a strike that would force Peregrine and his associates into the open. It was time to draw the enemy into his sights. Ethan's next move was bold and risky, but it was the only way to accelerate the unraveling of Peregrine's network. Using the information he'd gathered, he posed as an anonymous whistleblower and sent an encrypted message to Peregrine directly. The message was simple but effective. "I have evidence that your operation has been compromised. Meet me tomorrow night if you want to know who's behind it." He included a time and location, a derelict factory on the outskirts of town, a place where no one would think twice about suspicious activity. To add credibility, Ethan attached fabricated snippets of emails and financial records, implicating key members of Peregrine's network. The next day, Ethan pretended to go about his usual routine, but his mind was laser-focused on the upcoming confrontation. Nora, visibly on edge, spent the day pacing and checking her phone, likely aware of the growing tension within the network. By nightfall, Ethan was in position at the factory. He'd arrived hours earlier to set up surveillance equipment, cameras, microphones, and a few strategically placed distractions that would buy him time if things went south. Hidden in the shadows, he watched as a sleek black car pulled up to the entrance. Two men stepped out, both dressed in dark suits. Their sharp, calculated movements screamed professional enforcers. Behind them emerged a third figure, his face obscured by the dim light but unmistakably exuding authority. Peregrine. Ethan's breath quickened as he observed the trio enter the factory. Moments later, a second car arrived, and to Ethan's shock, Nora stepped out. She was dressed simply but looked tense, her movements hesitant. It seemed Peregrine had summoned her, likely suspecting her involvement in the recent sabotage. Ethan adjusted his position, his camera capturing every moment. He watched as Peregrine questioned Nora, his voice calm but icy. "Someone's been tampering with my operation," Peregrine said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "The emails, the missing money, this isn't a coincidence. And your name keeps coming up." Nora's voice cracked as she defended herself. "It's not me. I'm loyal. Someone's trying to frame me. I've been telling you that." The enforcers flanked her, their presence oppressive. Peregrine leaned closer, his voice barely audible to Ethan's microphone. "If you're lying to me, Nora, I won't just end you. I'll make sure the Langley girl suffers first." Ethan's grip tightened on the camera, fury burning in his chest. Peregrine's words confirmed his worst fears. Lily was a pawn in this deadly game. It took every ounce of restraint for Ethan to remain hidden, biding his time as the tension in the factory reached a boiling point. He needed Peregrine to tip his hand further, to expose more of the network's plans. Then a stroke of luck. Peregrine's phone buzzed, and he stepped away to take the call. In his absence, Nora's facade cracked. She whispered frantically to one of the enforcers, "You know it's not me. Help me prove it, and I'll make it worth your while." The man hesitated, his expression unreadable, but Ethan caught the flicker of doubt. Peregrine returned moments later, his expression colder than ever. "Enough games. If I find out you're lying, I'll make you regret the day you crossed me." He signaled to the enforcers, and the group exited the factory, leaving Nora visibly shaken. Ethan stayed hidden until the cars disappeared into the night. As he dismantled his equipment, he knew he had everything he needed to launch his next move. Peregrine had revealed enough to confirm his intent to harm Lily, and Nora's desperation had exposed cracks in their alliance. It was time for Ethan to turn the full weight of his revenge on them. Ethan wasted no time leveraging the evidence he had collected. That night, he worked tirelessly, compiling the recordings, photographs, and documents into an explosive dossier. Every conversation, every transaction, and every damning word from Peregrine and Nora was carefully arranged to tell a clear story. A criminal conspiracy targeting his sister and implicating his wife as a central player. But Ethan didn't just plan to hand this over to the authorities, he wanted to weaponize it. He sent select fragments of the dossier anonymously to several parties. Local journalists known for exposing corruption, law enforcement contacts from his cybersecurity days, and even a few of Peregrine's other associates. Each recipient received just enough to make them curious, to sow distrust, and to ignite interest without revealing the full extent of Ethan's hand. The morning after, the fallout began. At breakfast, Nora sat across from Ethan, her face pale and eyes darting nervously as her phone buzzed repeatedly. She picked it up, scanning the screen with mounting dread. Ethan sipped his coffee calmly, hiding his satisfaction. "What's wrong?" he asked, feigning concern. "Nothing," Nora snapped, her voice brittle. She stood abruptly, clutching her phone, and disappeared into her office. Ethan followed quietly, stopping outside the door to listen. Her panicked voice filtered through. "We've got a problem. No, I don't know who leaked it. Yes, it looks bad, but we can contain this. Just don't panic." The cracks in her composure were widening. Later that day, the first ripple hit Peregrine's network. Ethan's planted evidence suggested that one of Peregrine's closest lieutenants, the enforcer Nora had tried to bribe, was leaking information to the authorities. Internal suspicions within the group escalated into chaos. Ethan intercepted frantic messages about shifting assets, cutting ties, and removing liabilities. One message stood out: "Deal with Nora. She's too exposed." Ethan felt a jolt of both triumph and unease. Peregrine was turning on Nora. It was exactly the destabilization he'd hoped for, but it also meant she was in real danger. Not out of pity, but out of strategy, Ethan decided to intervene. That evening, as Nora sat in the living room, clutching her laptop, Ethan approached her. "You seem tense," he said, his tone disarmingly light. Nora glared at him but didn't respond. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I hope whatever mess you're in doesn't blow back on the rest of us." Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a tell. She was terrified. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice trembling despite her best effort. Ethan smiled faintly, stepping back. "Of course not." As he walked away, he knew she was spiraling, the walls closing in on her. Ethan returned to his office and prepared the next phase of his plan. He would force Nora to make a choice: confess and implicate Peregrine, or watch as her carefully constructed life crumbled around her. The game was nearing its climax, and Ethan wasn't about to lose. Ethan spent the night perfecting the final step of his scheme. He crafted an untraceable email to Nora, attaching key portions of the dossier, including a heavily edited recording from the factory meeting. The email's subject line was simple but chilling: "Ticking clock." The message read, "You thought you could betray everyone and walk away unscathed? Think again. I've sent copies of this to the police and the press. If you don't act, they'll come for you, and Peregrine won't protect you. Your only chance is to confess before the walls close in." He sent it just before dawn, knowing Nora checked her email early. From his vantage point in the kitchen, Ethan saw her reaction as she opened the message. Her face went ashen, and her trembling hands struggled to close her laptop. Panic was taking over. Ethan followed her movements throughout the day, watching as she made frantic calls and tore through files in her office. By late afternoon, she left the house, visibly shaken, clutching her laptop and a briefcase. Ethan tailed her, careful to keep his distance. Nora drove to a high-rise downtown, entering the sleek offices of a law firm. Ethan smirked. She was trying to cut a deal, no doubt looking for legal counsel to save herself. Inside, Nora met with an attorney, laying out what Ethan guessed was a sanitized version of her involvement in Peregrine's scheme. Using a directional microphone, Ethan picked up fragments of the conversation through the office's thin walls. "Can't be tied directly to the money," Nora said, her voice shaking. "If they find those documents, I'm finished." The lawyer's calm voice replied, "You need to distance yourself immediately. If anyone ties you to this, you'll take the fall for everyone." Perfect. Ethan had forced her to seek help, and now she was revealing her vulnerabilities. Later that night, Nora returned home, her face a mask of dread. Ethan waited until she was asleep before accessing her laptop again. As expected, he found emails she had drafted but not sent, addressed to Peregrine and others in the network. One stood out. "This is getting out of hand. I need assurances that my name won't come up if things go public. I've done my part. Don't make me regret it." Ethan copied the email and forwarded it to Peregrine using another burner account, adding a single line, "She's talking." By morning, Nora's world would begin to collapse. Ethan's goal was to make her so desperate that she had no choice but to betray Peregrine and the entire network. He didn't just want her to confess. He wanted her to suffer. The trap was set, and it was tightening with every move. Ethan's email to Peregrine ignited the final sparks of chaos. By mid-morning, Nora's phone buzzed relentlessly. She answered a call in hushed tones, pacing the living room with growing agitation. Ethan listened carefully from the hallway. "What do you mean you don't trust me?" she hissed. "I've done everything you asked." "No, I didn't send anything to the police. Why would I sabotage myself?" Ethan's chest tightened with satisfaction. Peregrine was turning the full weight of his paranoia on Nora. The once confident woman who had played Ethan so expertly now seemed to unravel with each passing moment. By noon, she stormed out of the house again, this time heading to an upscale hotel on the edge of the city. Ethan, of course, followed. He parked discreetly and tailed her inside, watching as she rode the elevator to a private suite. She wasn't alone for long. 30 minutes later, Peregrine himself arrived, flanked by 2 enforcers. Ethan knew he was witnessing the moment where everything would come to a head. From his hidden vantage point on a nearby rooftop, Ethan watched the scene unfold through the window. Nora pleaded, her body language frantic and desperate. Peregrine, on the other hand, was calm, almost amused. Ethan activated a high-powered directional microphone, the audio feeding into his headphones. "You think I'm the problem?" Nora's voice cracked. "I'm the reason this operation got as far as it did. I handled everything while you hid behind your henchmen." Peregrine's response was chilling. "And now you're a liability, Nora. You were useful, but I don't keep liabilities." One of the enforcers stepped forward, reaching for a weapon. Ethan's pulse spiked, but he remained composed. He knew the risks of intervening prematurely. Nora, sensing the danger, changed tactics. "Wait, I have the documents. Everything. If you kill me, you'll lose it all." Peregrine hesitated, signaling his man to stop. "Prove it," he said. Nora reached into her bag and produced a USB drive, holding it out like a lifeline. "This has everything you need. Transfers, accounts, the will. Everything to bury the Langley girl and secure the inheritance." Ethan's fury boiled over. They were still focused on Lily, even as their world crumbled. He gritted his teeth, his resolve hardening. Inside, Peregrine snatched the drive, scrutinizing it. "If this checks out, maybe you'll live to see tomorrow." Ethan had seen enough. He activated a silent alert he'd set up earlier, sending an anonymous tip to the police about suspicious activity in the suite. Then, he quietly slipped away, his heart pounding with adrenaline. The police would arrive within minutes, enough time to catch Peregrine, Nora, and the enforcers in a compromising position. But this wasn't the end, it was merely the beginning of their public downfall. As Ethan drove away, he felt a grim satisfaction. The noose was tightening, and soon, they'd have nowhere left to run. Ethan watched the fallout unfold from the safety of his home, his laptop glowing in the dim light. News reports began trickling in by the evening. Police had raided a luxury hotel suite after receiving an anonymous tip about suspicious activity. They detained several individuals, including a prominent local figure known to authorities, though no names had yet been released. It wasn't difficult to imagine the scene. Peregrine's icy composure shattered under police interrogation, Nora desperately trying to explain away her involvement, and the enforcers staying silent, loyal to their boss. Ethan couldn't help but smirk. But he wasn't done yet. Using his digital skills, he leaked a carefully curated selection of evidence to the press. These included financial documents, photographs of the shell accounts, and anonymized transcripts of incriminating conversations between Peregrine's network. The media latched onto the story, dubbing the scheme the inheritance conspiracy. The revelations sparked a frenzy. Journalists dug into Peregrine's business dealings, uncovering connections to laundering operations and embezzlement schemes. Meanwhile, whispers about Nora's role began circulating in online forums. At home, Nora was spiraling. She stayed locked in her room, speaking in frantic, hushed tones on the phone. Ethan occasionally caught snippets of her conversations. "They're tearing everything apart. No, I don't know who's behind this. It has to be someone close." Ethan relished the irony. She had no idea how close. Later that night, as Nora paced the living room, Ethan decided to confront her. Partially. He approached her with a calculated air of concern. "You seem stressed. Is something going on?" Nora snapped her head toward him, her face pale and eyes wide. "It's nothing. Just work stuff." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You've been on edge for days. Is it really just work?" She hesitated, then forced a tight smile. "Of course. Don't worry about it." Ethan didn't press further. He wanted her paranoia to fester, for her to question everyone and everything around her. Before going to bed, Ethan prepared the final stage of his plan. Using Nora's laptop, he scheduled an automatic email to her lawyer, containing unaltered versions of the damning documents she had previously shared with Peregrine. It was an anonymous leak, but the email's metadata would point directly to Nora. When it sent the next morning, Ethan knew the collapse would be complete. Nora's lawyer, realizing the depth of her involvement, would have no choice but to cut ties and possibly alert authorities to protect himself. Ethan sat back, sipping his coffee as the first rays of sunlight crept into the room. He had dismantled their empire, step by step, and now all that was left was to watch them burn. By midday, the fallout hit Nora like a tidal wave. Ethan watched as she received an urgent call from her lawyer. She paced the kitchen, her voice rising in panic. "What do you mean you're dropping me?" she shouted, her face flushed. "You can't do that now. I didn't send those documents." Ethan observed her unraveling with a grim sense of satisfaction. Her lawyer's betrayal wasn't a coincidence. Ethan had made sure the planted email painted Nora as a dangerous liability. Within hours, the press picked up the thread. Anonymous sources revealed Nora's name as one of the conspirators in the inheritance conspiracy. The articles painted her as a pivotal figure in the manipulation and attempted theft of Lily's inheritance, linking her to Peregrine's broader criminal operations. Nora's phone rang nonstop, her face growing paler with each call. By evening, she had locked herself in her room, leaving Ethan free to move to the next phase. Ethan composed an email to Lily, carefully wording it to explain the danger without overwhelming her. "Lily, there's something you need to know. You've been targeted by people who see you as a way to profit. I've uncovered evidence of their plans and taken steps to protect you. I'll explain everything when I see you tomorrow. Please stay safe." The email wasn't just for Lily's protection. It was also a way to ensure she heard the truth from him before the media twisted the narrative. That night, Ethan's home became eerily silent. Nora emerged briefly, her eyes hollow, and muttered something about needing to fix everything. Ethan let her leave, knowing her every option was already cut off. When she returned hours later, she looked defeated. She slumped onto the couch, holding her head in her hands. Ethan approached her, his voice carefully neutral. "Is there something you want to tell me, Nora?" he asked, his tone laced with subtle menace. She looked up at him, her face a mask of exhaustion and fear. "It's all falling apart," she whispered, almost to herself. Ethan leaned closer, his expression unreadable. "Maybe it's time you told me the truth." Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. She looked away, her shoulders trembling. Ethan knew she was breaking, but he wasn't ready to give her the mercy of knowing how much he already knew. Instead, he left her alone, retreating to his office to prepare the final stage of her downfall. He had one more move to make, and it would ensure Nora had no way out. Nora's crumbling demeanor signaled the perfect moment for Ethan's decisive strike. That evening, while she spiraled deeper into her despair, Ethan sent an email to Peregrine, crafting it as if it came directly from Nora's account. The message was deliberately incendiary. "Peregrine, this is out of control. I can't take the heat anymore. I'm turning everything over to the authorities tomorrow. If you want to salvage anything, you'd better take care of your end quickly. Don't contact me again." He knew Peregrine's paranoia would interpret this as a definitive betrayal. Moments after sending the email, Ethan deleted the message from Nora's sent folder, but left subtle traces that would lead Peregrine back to her account if he investigated. With this move, Nora would have no chance to defend herself. Peregrine's wrath would descend entirely on her. Ethan didn't stop there. He uploaded the complete dossier, emails, recordings, financial records, and photos, to a secure server and shared the link with law enforcement and select journalists. The file was titled The Langley Plot, a complete account. He knew its release would be the final nail in the coffin for both Peregrine's network and Nora's reputation. The next morning, chaos erupted. The media exploded with revelations about the conspiracy, now fully exposed to the public. Nora's name was front and center, plastered across headlines as the mastermind behind an elaborate scheme to exploit Lily's inheritance. Her face was everywhere, from news channels to social media feeds, with damning evidence tying her to Peregrine's criminal empire. Ethan watched as Nora frantically tried to control the damage, making call after desperate call, but it was too late. The police arrived by noon, their sirens piercing the quiet suburban street. Ethan opened the door calmly, his expression neutral as officers explained they were there for Nora. She appeared moments later, pale and trembling. "What is this?" she stammered, her voice barely audible. The officer held up a warrant. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and multiple charges of financial manipulation." Nora's eyes darted to Ethan, a flicker of realization crossing her face. "You," she whispered, her voice breaking. Ethan didn't respond. He simply watched as they cuffed her and led her to the waiting squad car. As the police drove away, Ethan closed the door and exhaled deeply. The house was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the storm that had raged within it. But his work wasn't finished yet. He still had to ensure Lily was safe from the fallout and that Peregrine's network was dismantled entirely. The final pieces of his revenge were falling into place. With Nora arrested and Peregrine's network unraveling, Ethan shifted his focus to the final stage of his plan, ensuring Lily's safety and putting an end to the conspiracy for good. The media frenzy around the inheritance conspiracy reached its peak, with reporters uncovering more layers of Peregrine's criminal empire. Several of his top associates had been implicated, and law enforcement launched coordinated raids on his assets. Ethan's anonymous dossier had done its job, leaving no room for deniability. But Peregrine himself was still at large. Ethan knew the man wouldn't go quietly. Through his surveillance network, he tracked Peregrine's communications, uncovering plans for an emergency meeting with his remaining allies at a secluded estate. Ethan seized the opportunity. Using an untraceable burner phone, he contacted the police and provided detailed information about the meeting. He made sure to frame it as a tip from one of Peregrine's own disgruntled associates, further deepening the fractures within the network. The raid went off like clockwork. Helicopters and armored vehicles surrounded the estate, and Peregrine was captured along with several of his henchmen. The news of his arrest sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld. Ethan felt a wave of satisfaction as he watched the news footage, but his victory was bittersweet. The betrayal, the lies, and the pain had left scars that wouldn't fade easily. With the major players neutralized, Ethan turned his attention to Lily. He met her at a quiet cafe, bringing the whole truth to light. He explained everything: Nora's betrayal, the plot to steal her inheritance, and his role in dismantling the conspiracy. Lily's face went through a spectrum of emotions. Shock, anger, disbelief, and finally, gratitude. "You saved me," she said softly, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't even know what to say." Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand. "Just promise me you'll stay vigilant. People like Nora and Peregrine, they prey on trust. Don't let anyone take advantage of you again." As they sat there, Ethan felt a sense of closure. He had protected Lily, destroyed the conspiracy, and ensured justice was served. In the days that followed, Ethan began to rebuild his life. The house felt emptier without Nora, but it also felt lighter, free from the shadows of deception. He focused on his work, his family, and slowly himself. One evening, as the sun set, Ethan stood on his porch, staring at the horizon. He thought about everything he had lost and everything he had fought to protect. In the end, revenge had been cruel, calculated, and absolute. But it had also been necessary. Ethan turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind him. The past was a battlefield he had survived, and now it was time to move forward, one step at a time.